All right, buckle up, because today we're diving deep into some seriously thought-provoking stuff. We're tackling Christopher Hitchens' powerful arguments against religion.
Oh, yeah, he doesn't hold back.
No, he does not. We're going to unpack his book, God is Not Great. It's a sharp, witty, at times scathing critique of religion and its impact on, well, everything, really.
On humanity, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Think of this deep dive as your express lane to understanding Hitchens' arguments, with hopefully a bit of humor along the way, right?
Well, he is known for his wit.
He is. So starting with, I think one of the most interesting things about Hitchens is where his atheism comes from, or I guess doesn't come from. It wasn't some bad experience or trauma that pushed him away from religion.
Right. He was actually skeptical from a really young age. Like, even as a boy, he was already questioning things, looking at religion through observation and reason.
It's true, and that really goes against, the stereotype that people become atheists because of some personal crisis or something, right?
Right.
Like they're angry at God. But Hitchens is all about the intellectual basis for his disbelief.
Yeah, he's got these 4 core objections to religion that he lays out, and it's like he's saying, look, this is what doesn't make sense to me.
Here's where I see the problems.
Yeah, exactly. And his first objection is kind of a big one. It gets right to the heart of it. Religion, he says, gets the origins of, well, us, of humanity and the cosmos, totally wrong.
It misrepresents it all.
Totally. And his argument is that as we learn more through science, as our knowledge grows, the religious explanations just don't hold up anymore.
Yeah, like they start to fall apart when you put them up against the evidence. He actually uses that great story about Laplace. Do you remember that?
Yeah, the French scientist.
Right. So Napoleon asked him why God wasn't mentioned in his book on, all that celestial mechanics.
All those orbits and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And Laplace just replies, I have no need for that hypothesis.
That's such a great line.
It's so good. And it shows how scientific progress often just replaces, well, it just makes those religious explanations unnecessary.
It kind of pushes them out of the way, yeah. Which kind of leads into Hitchens' second objection. He says religion pushes this weird mix of servility, like bowing down to a higher power.
Submitting to it.
And solipsism, this idea that we humans are like the center of everything.
So it's like we're nothing and everything at the same time.
Right. How does that even work?
That is a bit of a contradiction, isn't it?
Totally. And Hitchens sees that as a kind of fundamental tension in religious thought.
Okay, so misrepresenting origins, that weird servility-solipsism combo. What else?
Well, then he gets into the dangers of sexual repression. He argues that religion often, fosters that kind of repression, and that can cause all sorts of problems, psychological problems, social problems.
It's a tough subject for sure, but Hitchens really doesn't shy away from it, and he links that repression, directly to the power structures in religious institutions, especially that emphasis on celibacy, among priests and such.
Right. And his point is, it's not about morality, those restrictions. It's about control, controlling people and keeping that power.
Interesting. Okay, so 3 down. What's that 4th core objection?
Well, it's kind of a big one. He says that ultimately religion is all based on wishful thinking.
Like it's more comforting to believe.
Exactly. It's much nicer to believe in a loving God and an afterlife than to face the hard truths of existence.
The reality of it all.
The cold, hard reality. So he's basically saying religion is a way to avoid dealing with tough stuff, death, suffering, all the injustice.
Okay, so avoiding reality. That's a pretty heavy accusation.
Yeah, it is, but it's a core part of his argument. And, for me, one of the most compelling points he makes in the book is that religion isn't some divine revelation, it's man-made.
A human construct, right?
Exactly. And he backs this up by pointing out all the inconsistencies and contradictions within religion itself.
Like, if it was truly from God, wouldn't it all be clear and make sense?
Right. Think about it. You've got different interpretations of scriptures, disagreements about prophets and teachings, constant revisions. If it was all divinely inspired, wouldn't it be more unified?
Yeah, like shouldn't it all line up perfectly?
Exactly. And that just proves Hitchens' point. Religion is a product of human interpretation, human invention.
So if it's man-made, then its authority is kind of shaky, right?
Exactly. It's not about divine commands anymore. It's just people pushing their own beliefs and values.
Which leads right into another big issue, religion trying to control secular life. Hitchens says it's not content with just promising heaven or hell. It wants power in this world.
Right. It wants to influence everything. Laws, morality, how we behave.
He uses a really strong example to show this. Mother Teresa and the Irish divorce referendum back in the 90s. Do you remember that?
Vaguely. Remind me.
So Ireland was voting on whether to allow divorce, which obviously the Catholic Church was very much against.
Uh-huh.
And Mother Teresa, this icon of compassion, she flew over to Ireland to campaign against divorce.
Wow.
I know, right?
It just shows how religion can be used to force a certain set of morals on everyone, even on issues that should be personal choices, things that the law should decide in a secular state.
It raises such a big question. Where's the line between religious freedom and the right to make your own choices? Especially when those choices go against religious teachings.
Right, and that conflict, that tension between religious beliefs and secular values, we see it everywhere today. Same-sex marriage, abortion, even teaching evolution in schools.
Yeah, the list goes on. And Hitchens, he doesn't avoid the really dark consequences of this clash either. He brings up that horrifying case of Salman Rushdie, the author who had a fatwa put on him.
Oh, right, for his book, The Satanic Verses. Some people saw it as blasphemous and called for his death.
Yeah, it's scary how extreme it got. And the really disturbing thing is, a lot of religious leaders didn't condemn the violence. They actually defended the idea that blasphemy should be punished.
It's chilling. It shows how easily that kind of religious extremism, that intolerance, can lead to violence and shutting down free speech.
And it all comes back to what Hitchens calls the problem of faith. He sees faith as just blind belief, accepting things without proof just because some religious authority says so.
Right. He contrasts that with reason and evidence, which he thinks are the foundations of, well, of thinking, of learning.
He's not saying people of faith are stupid, but that relying on faith without questioning can leave you open to manipulation.
And that leads us to one of his main points. Faith and reason just don't mix.
They're not compatible, in his view.
Exactly. As science explains more of the world, the need for supernatural explanations just fades away.
He uses the example of Laplace again, remember. The God hypothesis wasn't necessary. And we see that tension everywhere, the origins of the universe, evolution, even the idea of prayer working.
Right, right.
So that's the groundwork for Hitchens' critique of religion. We've looked at his background, his big objections to religious belief, and that key idea of religion being something humans created, not something divine.
And in part 2, we'll dig deeper into some of the specific examples he uses to make his case. We'll look at the flaws he sees in religious texts and his arguments against the idea that religion is the source of morality. Welcome back. So we've been laying out Christopher Hitchens' case against religion, and now we're getting to the point where he really digs into the flaws he sees, especially in religious texts.
Yeah, and he spends a lot of time on the Old Testament in particular. He really picks it apart.
Oh, he does. He points out all sorts of inconsistencies, things that don't line up historically, and, well, some parts that just wouldn't pass for ethical today.
Let's just say some parts haven't aged well.
Exactly. And one of the things he focuses on is the Ten Commandments, supposedly handed down by God, set in stone. But he points out that they had to be rewritten after Moses smashed the first set.
Oh, right, because he was angry.
Furious. So Hitchens asks, if these commandments are really from a perfect, all-knowing God, you'd think he could have made sure Moses had a little better anger management.
Yeah, that's a funny point. Like, shouldn't God have foreseen that little outburst?
It raises questions about taking those stories so literally, which a lot of fundamentalists do. And then there are the commandments themselves. Some are fine, good moral guidelines, but then you've got stuff about property, livestock, punishments that seem, well, pretty brutal by today's standards.
Yeah, stoning someone for adultery doesn't really fly anymore.
Nope. And that's not even mentioning the parts of the Old Testament that talk about wiping out entire groups of people, like the Amalekites. Hitchens points out that even today, people use those passages to justify violence.
That is scary. Using those old texts to justify things happening now.
It is. Which leads to another big argument Hitchens makes. Religion claiming to be the source of morality. He says, absolutely not.
He disagrees.
Big time. He points to all the examples of religious figures behaving badly. You've got corrupt priests, hypocritical preachers, corrupts of abuse, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it's like that saying, do as I say, not as I do, but take it to a whole other level.
Exactly. And then he turns it around and talks about secular people who lived really ethical, generous lives. No religion needed.
Right. He brings up Colonel Ingersoll. He was a big advocate for free thought back in the 19th century. Known for his generosity and work for human rights.
A real humanist. Hitchens' point is you don't need to be religious to be a good person. Morality comes from empathy, from reason, fairness, human stuff, not God stuff.
You don't need a rule book to know stealing is wrong or that you should help people in need.
Right. And he goes even further, saying that sometimes religion has actually held back moral progress.
How so?
He says certain religious beliefs were used to justify slavery, keep women down, discriminate against minorities.
It's true, those things have happened.
It shows that even with good intentions, blind faith can be dangerous, and that ties into his whole critique of just blindly believing. He uses the example of cults to show how easily people can be manipulated when they give up their critical thinking.
Yeah, he talks about those cargo cults in Melanesia after World War II. The islanders saw all the stuff the American soldiers brought and started imitating their rituals.
They thought it would bring them wealth and goods from the sky.
Like magic.
It's a wild example of how wanting something badly can make you believe in pretty irrational things. And Hitchens brings this up to talk about more modern examples, too, like intelligent design.
Which he sees as trying to push religion into science.
Exactly. And he says that's just not how it works. For him, trying to make faith and reason fit together is pointless.
They're just fundamentally different.
He says that faith means accepting things without evidence, which is the opposite of how science and critical thinking work.
So he's saying relying only on faith can actually hold you back intellectually.
And morally, too, he's worried that when faith comes before reason, it opens the door to all kinds of bad things. Fanaticism, intolerance, justifying harmful actions.
It's a pretty serious warning.
It is. It's important to say here, that a lot of people find Hitchens' views pretty provocative, even offensive. He doesn't sugarcoat things, and he directly takes on what he sees as the problems with religion.
He's definitely not afraid to ruffle some feathers.
Not at all. But it's important to remember that he is engaging in a serious debate. He wants us to think about our beliefs, to question things, to look at the role of religion in society critically.
He's not just attacking people of faith.
Right. He's challenging us to think deeply about what we believe, the power of dogma, and the importance of using reason to make sense of the world.
And even though he's critical of religion, he does recognize its impact on history and culture. He even quotes from religious texts sometimes to show what he sees as contradictions.
It's an interesting way to make his point. He doesn't shy away from the complexities. He looks at religion on its own terms, using its language and stories to kind of expose what he sees as its weaknesses.
So we've explored some of the more controversial parts of Hitchens' argument. In part 3, we'll step back a bit and look at some other perspectives on this relationship between religion and reason. It's a big topic, and there's always more to consider. Welcome back to the show. So we've spent the last 2 parts, really digging into Christopher Hitchens' arguments against religion. Pretty heavy stuff, and he makes some strong points. But it's important to remember that there's always more than one side to these things.
Absolutely. And Hitchens, he's got his perspective, but it's not the whole story. Not all religious people are like, fundamentalists taking everything literally.
Right.
There are plenty of people of faith who see no problem with believing in God and also accepting reason and science.
It's not an either-or for them.
Nope. For them, faith is about finding meaning and purpose, but they don't have to, shut off their brains to do it.
Right. It's not about checking your intellect at the door. Think about someone like Francis Collins. He led the Human Genome Project.
Huge scientific undertaking.
Yeah, a big deal. And he's a devout Christian. He sees science as a way to explore, God's creation.
That's interesting. Science is the tool to understand the how, but religion explains the why.
Yeah, that's how some people see it. They might say science tells you how the universe works, but religion tells you why we're here.
And it's worth remembering that even within religion, there are tons of different interpretations.
Oh, for sure.
Hitchens often focuses on those literal interpretations, especially of the Old Testament, but a lot of people of faith don't read those texts literally.
Right. It's not all about taking every word as absolute truth.
They see those stories as allegorical, metaphorical, or reflecting the time they were written in. The culture.
Yeah, they might say the Bible isn't a science book or a history book. It's about spiritual wisdom and ethical guidance.
That's a good point. And look, just like with any belief system, there are different schools of thought within religions.
Yeah, it's a huge spectrum. You can't just lump everyone together like, Hitchens sometimes does.
Exactly. You've got all sorts of different perspectives, interpretations, ways of practicing. It's really diverse, and it's always evolving. And let's not forget the psychological and social aspects of religion, the role it plays in people's lives. Hitchens might call it wishful thinking, but for a lot of people, religion gives them a sense of community, belonging, purpose, hope.
Yeah.
Those things are really important. They can be really beneficial.
And think about it. Those rituals, those beliefs, they can offer comfort when people are grieving or going through tough times. Religion can help people deal with uncertainty, make sense of their place in the world.
It's true, and there's no denying that religion has had a huge impact on human history and culture. It's been a source of comfort and inspiration for so many people.
So even if you agree with Hitchens about some of the problems with, religious institutions or dogmas or the danger of blind faith, it's important to remember that religion isn't one big monolith.
Right.
There's a huge diversity of beliefs and practices. We have to respect people who find meaning in their faith and recognize that religion has contributed some good things to society.
For sure.
I think in the end, what this deep dive into Hitchens shows us is that there's this tension between faith and reason. Belief is complicated, and religion has a lot of power in people's lives.
It's a conversation that's probably never going away, as long as people are asking those big questions about existence.
Yeah, what's it all about? What's the meaning? Why are we here? What is reality anyway?
And whether you agree with Hitchens or not, we hope this has at least made you think about your own beliefs. and be open to different perspectives. And most importantly, engage in those conversations respectfully with intellectual honesty.
That's what we try to do here. It's not about finding the right answers. It's about asking good questions, thinking deeply, and maybe leaving you with even more questions than you started with.
So keep asking those questions, keep learning, and thank you for joining us on the deep dive. It's been great having you.